and welcome to Fairy Tale Time with Brack Llewellyn. Today we have an Old English folk tale known as The Baker's Daughter. And let's get started. I can't wait to hear it. This is new to me. Thank you, Brack, and let's get started.
All right then, everyone gather round, come close, settle in, call the grown-ups. Let them come hear this story as well. This is kind of a rare story, but it's a good one, I think, and I think you'll enjoy it. I need you to listen carefully with both ears, right? As we always do. Most importantly, turn on the old imagination and let the words that I send out towards you form pictures in that wonderful mind of yours. This is called The Baker's Daughter, and it is indeed about a fellow who owned a bakery in a village long, long, long ago. He was the best baker in the entire village, if not in the entire kingdom. He was a great baker, but he wasn't a very nice person. He could be very short-tempered, and he would say some terrible things to people sometimes. But his baked goods were so good, so delicious, so melt-in-your-mouth wonderful, that people would put up with his remarks just to have his baked goods. And he had been known to maybe charge a little too much sometimes for them as well. But people put up with it anyway because he was so very good at what he did. The baker got older, and he decided to retire. And he turned the bakery over to his daughter. And the folks in the village hoped that the baker's daughter might have a little bit better spirit than her father did. But unfortunately, that turned out not to be true. She was just as short-tempered and snippy and sometimes just plain mean, even more so than her father sometimes. The people in the village talked about it. They would go to the bakery because the baked goods were so very good, but they would talk about her when she wasn't there. An elder in the village said, "I know why she's that way. It's because she lacks wisdom. If only she had wisdom, she'd feel better about herself, and she wouldn't be nearly as bad-tempered as she is." So the people kept going to the bakery, and once in a while, one of the older folks in the village who really had sort of had all they wanted of her, would tell the baker's daughter, "You know, if you don't get in a better frame of mind, if you don't try to be nicer to people, the fairies are going to come for you someday." But the baker's daughter just brushed that off, and she laughed. She thought nothing of fairies. She believed nothing of fairies, and she thought they were just being foolish old people. Deep one winter, right before closing one day, a little old woman came in to the bake shop. The baker's daughter had never seen her before. Tiny little woman. The coat she was wearing was not nearly enough for the cold weather, and her shoes were shoes in name only. The old woman came in, much to the dismay of the baker's daughter, who'd had a long day and wanted to go home, and asked her for just a bit of dough. Not even baked bread, just a little bit of dough to eat. She told the baker's daughter, "I have no money, and I'm very hungry. If you could just spare me a bit of dough." Well, at first the baker's daughter thought to turn her out, but then she thought, oh, well, why not? So she pinched off a small handful of dough and handed it to the old woman. And the old woman said, "If you would just put that in your oven for just a moment and bake it just a bit, that would make it much more tasty." So the baker's daughter, rolling her eyes, or whatever they did back in those days, opened up the oven, which was still warm, put the dough in there, and closed it. She left it in only a few minutes, and when she opened the oven again and looked inside, instead of just a bit of dough that had baked, there was a huge loaf of perfectly baked bread. It smelled wonderful. The smell filled the entire bake shop. The little woman behind the baker's daughter said, I believe that's mine. And the baker's daughter says, no, look, oh, I'm sorry. It has fallen in the oven and has fallen down toward the fire, and it's no good. I'm sorry. Meaning all the time to keep that perfect loaf of bread for herself. So the old woman asked again, "Well, do you have another bit of dough that you could put in there for me and bake for just a minute?" Now the baker's daughter once again obliged her with an even smaller bit of dough this time. She put it in the oven and closed the door and waited just a minute or two. Opening it up, thinking it might be a little bit brown, she looked, and there was an even bigger more perfect loaf of bread than the one before, from an even smaller amount of dough. Something strange was going on in this bake shop. And once again, the baker's daughter made an excuse that, oh, well, it's all burned and overbaked and you couldn't eat it anyway. I'll just throw it out, meaning to keep that loaf of bread for herself. The third time, the old woman asked, just a little bit of dough, please. Pop it in your oven. I'll take it and be on my way. This time it was just a pinch of dough, the smallest the baker's daughter could pull out. She popped it in the oven and shut the door and had much more than shut it when she opened it again, just wanting to go home. But this time her eyes nearly bugged out of her head. There was this large, perfect, once again, loaf of bread sitting there, 3 times as large as the first one. What, she thought, is going on? But this time, instead of making an excuse, she noticed the old woman looking over her shoulder into the oven, and the old woman said, I believe that's mine. And the baker's daughter said, no, 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 that's mine. I promised you a bit of dough. That's a loaf of bread. That's 2 different things. The old woman stepped back, and she looked down at the floor for a moment, and she looked up, and she smiled at the baker's daughter. She said, I had heard from the people in the village that you lacked wisdom. I hoped it wasn't true, because if you have wisdom, then you will feel better about yourself, and you won't have to be mean to people and say terrible things to them and have a bad temper all the time. You need wisdom, don't you? And the baker's daughter said, so what if I do? What are you going to do about it? Well, the old woman said, did the people in the village, the elders, not tell you that someday, if you didn't improve your look at life, the fairies might come for you? So what if they did? Said the baker's daughter. I am one of those, said the old woman, traveling in disguise. I came here to see if what the people in the village said was true, and alas, it is. So I'm going to grant you some wisdom in a way you may not expect. Tell me, daughter of the baker, what is the wisest creature you can think of right now? Well, said the baker's daughter, I suppose the owl. The owl is supposed to be a wise creature. So they are, said the old woman. And she raised her hands and clapped them together. And in the blink of an eye, the baker's daughter was transformed into an owl. A wise owl, but an owl nonetheless. The old woman opened up the door, and the baker's daughter, in her new form, flew out into the night to live a much wiser life. Now, I know you're wondering, what happened to the bake shop? If you're like me, you want to know. Well, it's still there in that little village, and that little village is still there from what I understand to this very day. It's been many, many, many years. But there are some people running it now, and, well, they're nice people. They have a wonderful attitude toward life. They always have a smile on their faces, and they seem to be a little bit magical. You think maybe the fairies are running that bake shop? Well, if you're ever in England and you find a little bake shop run by some smiling little old ladies, you might find out for yourself. That is the English folk tale of the baker's daughter. As always, you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you for listening, and we will see you again very soon.